North Moore Street, Tribeca. 1996. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy is standing outside the apartment she shares with John Kennedy Jr., and there are photographers across the street. There are always photographers now. She has been married for 11 days. She is 30 years old. She built her career from nothing: Calvin Klein showrooms, fashion PR, a name she made herself in a city that does not hand names to anyone. She knows exactly who she is. That self-knowledge is the most precise thing she owns. He is standing beside her. And beside him, invisible and total, is the machine, the apparatus of the Kennedy name, the 30-year American story that has been running since Dallas, still running straight through her. She did not marry a man. She married a mythology that was already in motion before she was born. She is negotiating for a life, a real one where her face is hers, one where an ordinary morning is just an ordinary morning. The negotiation was already decided before she stood on that sidewalk. She did not know that yet. She negotiated for everything. Old Money Tragedy shows what was never on the table. Subscribe so the terms are finally known. Carolyn Bessette did not inherit anything. That is the first thing to understand about what she brought to every table. She was born in White Plains, New York, in 1966, the third daughter of Anne and William Bessette. Her parents divorced when she was young. Her mother remarried Richard Freeman, an architect, and the family relocated to Greenwich, Connecticut. Not the generational estate Greenwich of old money portraits and trust fund children, but the working, striving Greenwich of people who had arrived and intended to stay. She attended Greenwich High School. People who knew her then described someone who occupied space in a way that was unusual. Not aggressively, not performatively, but with an ease that made rooms orient toward her without appearing to try. She graduated from Boston University in 1988 with a degree in education. She did not come out with connections. She came out with herself. What she built after that was real and earned. She started in retail at Calvin Klein, on the floor, learning the product, learning the customer, learning the language of how clothing communicates who a person wants to be. She moved into public relations and then into the showroom and eventually into a senior publicist role. People who worked alongside her at Calvin Klein in the early 1990s described someone who had an eye that went beyond fashion, not just aesthetic intelligence, but the rarer thing, the ability to understand how an image is assembled and what it costs and what it buys. She knew how rooms worked. She knew how attention worked. She knew, with precision, the difference between a person and a character. This was the New York fashion world at its peak moment, the early 1990s, when a handful of designers and a handful of publicists and a handful of editors controlled an enormous amount of cultural narrative. It was a world built entirely on image management, on the ability to read what a room required and deliver it without appearing to calculate. She was genuinely good at it. The kind of good that requires both intelligence and temperament. The intelligence to see what was needed and the temperament to provide it without losing herself in the performance of it. That last part, not losing herself in the performance, was the specific quality that set her apart. She had opinions. She laughed loudly. She was, by multiple accounts of people who knew her well, completely and specifically herself in private, while being completely and strategically composed in public. These two things coexisted in her without apparent strain. She could move between the private Carolyn and the public-facing Carolyn fluidly. She was not confused about which was which. She met John F. Kennedy Jr. around 1992 at a Calvin Klein event. He was, at that point, already the most photographed private citizen in America. He had been photographed since he was 3 years old, sitting beside his father's casket in a small blue coat, his hand raised in a salute that the country would never forget. He had grown up inside the full weight of that image and everything that followed, the mythology, the expectation, the relentless attention. He had tried to build something genuinely his own. NYU Law School, the bar exam, a stint as an assistant district attorney in Manhattan, and then George Magazine, which launched in 1995 and was, in part, his attempt to take the attention he had never asked for and direct it toward something he had chosen. He was not passive. He was not simply coasting on the name. He had done actual work. But here is what Carolyn Bessette understood that perhaps she did not fully account for. You cannot separate John Kennedy Jr. from what he carried. The name was not a piece of him. It was the air around him. You could not be near him without breathing it. She understood this. She was not naive. She had spent years in a world that ran entirely on image and attention, and she had seen, close up, how those things could hollow a person out if the person let them. She was clear-eyed about what she was entering. What she brought to the first table, then, was a genuinely strong position. An identity that was specifically and precisely hers. A career built on her own intelligence, her own instincts, her own labor. A beauty that was not the commercial kind, not the kind that photographs well and diminishes in person, but the rarer kind that is more arresting in person than in photographs, the kind that derives from something behind the face rather than simply in it. And the quality that would prove to be both her greatest asset and the first thing the negotiations would cost her. She knew, with unusual exactness, who she was. That self-knowledge was not incidental. It was structural to everything she brought. The first negotiation was not about the wedding. It was not about the photographs. It was about something more fundamental, whether she could enter his world and remain a person with an interior life that genuinely belonged to her. Whether the relationship between them could be, in its daily texture, a relationship between two private people. Whether what they shared and what they kept could be a decision they made together, as equals. She came to the first table believing she had leverage. She was right. What she did not yet understand was the specific nature of what was on the other side. He was not negotiating against her. He was negotiating with 30 years of something that he himself had never been able to put down. He did not fully know what he was asking her to enter. He had never been outside it. He had never experienced the thing she was being asked to give up. He did not know how to miss what he had never possessed. The table looked even. It was not even. The inequality was architectural, not personal. It was built into the structure of what the name had always been and what the name required. She did not know that yet. She sat down anyway. John Kennedy Jr. was, by nearly every account, a genuinely good man. This needs to be said clearly because what follows is not about his character. His character was not the leverage. People who knew him consistently describe warmth that was not performance, a quality of presence that made whoever he was speaking to feel genuinely attended to, a kind of ease that is unusual in someone who had been mythologized since childhood and who might have retreated entirely behind the wall that mythology builds. He was curious. He was funny. He was, in the word people reach for most often, kind. The leverage was not him. The leverage was what came with him, what could not be separated from him, could not be moderated or managed or put in a drawer on the days when it was inconvenient. The leverage was the name. And the name was not a word. The name was a machine. Machine that had been running continuously since November 22, 1963, and that had never been turned off. Understand what that machine was by 1996. The Kennedy story was the Central American mythology of the second half of the 20th century. The assassination, the grief, the lost future, the children who grew up in its shadow. John Kennedy Jr. had been the face of that story since he was 3 years old. He had been on magazine covers he had not consented to. He had been followed by photographers as a matter of routine, the way weather is tracked. Not personal, not optional, just the persistent condition of the world. When People magazine named him the sexiest man alive in 1988, it was not a compliment he had sought. It was the machine asserting its claim on him. The machine did not ask permission. He had found ways to live inside this. George magazine was one of them, an attempt to take the attention that would come regardless and channel it toward something with editorial purpose. He had developed, over decades, a set of habits and tolerances that allowed him to function as a private person inside a life that was being continuously observed. He knew, without knowing he knew it, how to move through a photographed world. He had practiced it since childhood. The practice had become invisible to him. This was the specific nature of his leverage. Not that he was difficult or demanding or deliberately withholding, but that he had 30 years of practice navigating the apparatus, practice so thorough it had become unconscious, and she was starting from zero. He could not fully teach her what he had learned, because he could not fully see what he had learned. You cannot describe the water you have always swum in. What the apparatus did to Carolyn Bessette Kennedy once the marriage became public was immediate and total. The cameras did not ease her in. The coverage did not begin modestly and accelerate. It was full and constant from the first day. The character C. Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, style icon, wife of JFK Jr., the woman who had somehow married America's prince, was assembled instantaneously from whatever the cameras could capture. And the character was beautiful and composed and impeccable. The character was not wrong, exactly, but the character was not a full person. It was the portion of a full person that is visible at 20 feet through a long lens. The gap between the character and the actual woman, vivid, opinionated, privately at ease in ways the cameras never caught, was enormous. She had spent her career understanding exactly how image management worked. Now she was the subject of it. The subject and the practitioner are not the same role. She had always been on the side that assembled the image. Now she was on the side being assembled. The tools she had were real, but the scale of the machine was something she had not encountered before. His leverage was that scale. A scale she could not counter because she could not negotiate with a system. Systems do not have tables. They do not make agreements. They continue. What he held that she could not match was not power over her. It was the cumulative distance of a lifetime's adaptation. He had made a kind of peace with being continuously observed. He had not offered that peace to her. He could not offer it. It is not transferable. You cannot hand someone decades of practice. You cannot give someone the accommodation to a reality they have not yet had time to build. His leverage was not what it appeared to be. What it appeared to be, the cameras, the fame, the intrusion, was already more than enough. What it actually was underneath that was deeper. He was asking her to live inside a condition that had taken him a lifetime to learn to inhabit, and he was asking her to learn it in real time, in public, without the luxury of making mistakes. Cumberland Island, Georgia. September 21, 1996. The First African Baptist Church holds fewer than 30 people. No announcement had been made to the press. No photographers were permitted near the ceremony. The guests were small in number and sworn to keep it. She wore a bias-cut silk charmeuse gown, designed with Narciso Rodriguez, that managed to be both architectural and soft. A gown that communicated exactly what she wanted a gown to communicate. That she had opinions, that those opinions were precise, and that she had not chosen to be photographed in a Kennedy-adjacent spectacle. The photographs that eventually circulated are, by any measure, extraordinary. Two people who look genuinely, privately present in the moment they are in. This was the first negotiation. Read the terms carefully. She asked for privacy, not the permanent end of public life. She understood that was not on offer and did not ask for it. She asked for the ceremony itself to be private, the threshold of the marriage, the specific, contained event of two people becoming a family. She asked for that threshold to be held. What she received was something that looked like it and was not. The wedding was private for approximately 12 hours. Then the photographs circulated anyway, through channels that could not be fully controlled. Then the coverage was total and immediate and global. Every detail, the dress, the island, the chapel, the guest list, was dissected and reported and assessed. The coverage was not hostile. It was, by the standards of celebrity coverage, warm and admiring. The coverage did not care that it was unwanted. The machine does not take requests. Here is the specific cost of what she accepted at the first table, measured in terms she would have understood from her own professional background. She asked for privacy as a condition. She received privacy as a single event. The condition of the life, the cameras, the coverage, the character being assembled, resumed the day after the ceremony and never paused again. She had negotiated for a boundary. She received, instead, one afternoon on which the boundary held and then was never mentioned again. What this cost her that she would not fully understand for some months. The expectation of normalcy. Not normalcy itself. She had not expected that. The expectation of it. The ordinary quiet assumption inside a new marriage that the two of you are building something that, whatever its difficulties, essentially belongs to you. That assumption was not available. Everything they built was visible. Every phase of the building was captioned. She had accepted a marriage that was, from the outside, a story America was telling about itself. From the inside, it was supposed to be a life between two actual people. The gap between those two things, that gap was not going to close. She would spend 3 years trying to close it. She asked for one thing. She received something that looked like it but was not. The difference between what she asked for and what she received, that difference is the whole story. The first negotiation was concluded. She took what had been agreed and carried it forward into the marriage. She had no way of knowing it would be lighter than every table that followed. What she did not yet know, that what she had accepted was not just the terms of a wedding. She had accepted the structure of every negotiation that would follow. She had established at the very first table that the apparatus could not be held at the boundary she drew. Every subsequent negotiation would begin with that established fact. The first table looked reasonable. Only the last table would tell you it was not. The first negotiation had cost her the expectation of ordinary privacy. She arrived at the second table already diminished by that cost, though she did not name it that way yet. The second negotiation was about her image, specifically, about whether she could exert any meaningful authorship over the character that this coverage infrastructure was continuously assembling from her. By 1997, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy had become what fashion editors called a style icon, a term that sounds like praise and functions for the person it describes like a cage. The coverage of her clothing was relentless. The commentary on her appearance was constant. Magazines ran photographs of her crossing the street in the same tone they ran photographs of runway collections. Her face, her body, her choices about what to wear on an ordinary Tuesday, all of it was material for a character she had not agreed to play. She brought real skills to this negotiation. She knew mage management from the inside. She thought carefully about what she wore in public, how she moved through space, what she allowed to be visible. She was not passive. She was strategic. She became exceptional at the constructed composure, the look of effortless ease that required, in reality, total vigilance. Look at photographs of her from 1997. The composure is real. The beauty is specific and not generic. The style is genuinely hers, not magazine-assigned, not stylist-managed, but the product of an actual eye with actual convictions. She negotiated at the second table for the right to be the author of her own image even if she could not control the apparatus doing the publishing. She partially won that negotiation. The character the coverage built was, at least, recognizably connected to who she actually was. What it cost her. The version of herself that did not need to manage anything. The Carolyn who had moved through Manhattan with natural ease, who had occupied rooms without strategy, who had been publicly herself without calculation. That woman was gone from public space. In her place was a performance of ease so precise it read as the real thing. Which means the ease itself had become inaccessible. You cannot perform effortlessness and simultaneously experience it. She had traded the thing for the appearance of the thing. The second table was smaller than the first. She negotiated anyway. What remained after two negotiations was the interior. The private Carolyn, the one her close friends knew, the one who laughed loudly and had opinions about everything and was, by every account of people who loved her, completely alive with specific personality. That woman was still there. But she was increasingly confined to spaces the cameras could not reach. Apartments, small dinners, the inside of cars. The particular freedom of being somewhere indoors with people who knew her before the character existed. The third negotiation was about time, specifically ABO. The rate at which the private interior was being compressed by the public exterior. She had already surrendered the expectation of privacy in the city. She had already surrendered effortless public movement. What she was trying to negotiate for now was the pace of the compression. Some slowing of it, some guarantee that the interior space would not continue to shrink indefinitely. Reports from people close to her in 1997 and 1998 describe a woman who found the public life increasingly costly. She sometimes declined to leave the apartment on days when she knew photographers were stationed outside, calculating that the expenditure of composure required to move through the cameras was not worth the trip. She was measuring herself in units she had not used before. How much does it cost to go outside today? Is it worth it? This is the negotiation that is most painful to read clearly. Because she was not failing to adapt. She was adapting constantly. Every refusal to go outside was not avoidance, it was resource management. She was a person with finite reserves of what the life required, living inside a demand for those reserves that did not have a finite point. She was rationing. The cost, a further compression of the life. The interior space was defended more fiercely, which meant the exterior space shrank further. She accepted this. She had no other option that preserved anything. She came to the third table with what the second had left her. The second had left her less than the first. The third would leave her less than the second. The pattern was visible. She could see it. She sat down at the table anyway. There is a moment, not a single day, not a single event, but a period that people who knew her placed somewhere in 1998, when the direction of her negotiating changed. Before that point, she had been negotiating for something. After it, she was negotiating to avoid losing what she still had. What she still had was herself. Not the character. Not the style I see. The specific, exact, irreducible fact of being Carolyn Bessette. Distinct from Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. Distinct from the woman on the magazine covers. The person who had known herself with unusual precision when she sat down at the first table. That self-knowledge had been her primary capital. It had been eroding. She had been managing the gap between who she was and who the story required her to be for 2 years. Managing that gap required a small act of self-suppression every day. One small act does not compound visibly. 3 years of small daily acts produces something measurable. The reversal was not dramatic. It was not a scene. It was a shift in the direction she was facing at the table. Forward had become backward. She was no longer trying to gain ground. She was trying to hold it. People close to her described the changes in the language of anxiety rather than grief. Difficulty in public that had not been there before, a narrowing of the spaces in which she felt safe, a relationship with her husband that was, by multiple accounts from people who cared about both of them, under real strain. Not because they did not love each other. Because the structure surrounding them was making it harder to love each other well. Two people trying to find each other inside a machine that had its own requirements for what they were supposed to be. What she accepted to prevent the total loss of herself. A further withdrawal. Smaller spaces. Fewer public appearances. A harder perimeter around the interior. She was paying for the protection of the last thing with the further reduction of the life. She accepted the terms. The negotiation was concluded. What it left her was smaller than what she had brought. By 1999, what she still had was the most durable thing, harder to name, harder to negotiate with, but present. She still loved him. Not simply, not without complexity, but genuinely. People who knew them together in that final year report something that had survived what had been asked of it. A real attachment between two real people, complicated by the structure they were living inside, but not extinguished by it. And she still had the future, the unresolved question of what the life could become, whether the terms could shift, whether they could find, together, something workable, some form of the life that left enough of her intact. She did not know the answer, but the question was still open. She had given up, in sequence, over 3 years, the expectation of ordinary privacy, the effortlessness of public movement, the belief that the compression would ease, the unshaken certainty of who she was. What remained at this last table was investment in the possibility that the open question would eventually have an answer worth having. She put that investment on the table. Her continued presence in the life. Her willingness to stay and try. What came back across the table? Not yet enough. But not nothing. The negotiation was ongoing. She was still at the table. By the end, she was negotiating with what remained after everything else had been accepted away. There was not much left. She put it on the table anyway. That is not defeat. That is what staying at a table looks like when everything has cost something. She stayed. That should be the first thing anyone says about Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. She stayed. Indeed, she tried with what she had left. Strip away every specific negotiation, the wedding, the image, the compression, the reversal. Remove the individual tables and read what she was reaching for across all of them. She was negotiating for the right to be a private person. Not a famous person who has privacy. Not a public figure who guards a carefully maintained interior space. Private person. Someone whose daily experience of being alive is not mediated, constantly, by being watched. Someone who can walk to a coffee shop in the morning and be, For the length of that walk and that coffee, no one in particular. Someone whose face is not property. Someone whose grief is hers. Someone whose Tuesday is just a Tuesday, unremarkable, unrecorded. Hers. That is what she was reaching for at every table. The wedding was a negotiation for it. The image management was a negotiation for it. The withdrawal into private spaces was a negotiation for it. Every decision she made about what to wear and where to go and how to move through the city, all of it was an attempt to secure enough private space to remain a private person inside a life that was structurally and permanently public. It was never on any table. Could not have been. Not because John Kennedy Jr. withheld it. Not because the Kennedy family refused it, but because what she needed was structurally unavailable inside the life she was living. The system of attention surrounding John Kennedy Jr. was not a condition that could be modified by negotiation. It was not a policy that could be changed. It was not a person who could be persuaded. It had its own economics, its own momentum, its own logic. Magazines sold when she was on the cover. Photographers were paid when they got the shots. Readers consumed the story because the story was continuously available to be consumed. The coverage did not recognize her as a party to any negotiation. She was not, to it, a negotiator. She was the subject. I have reviewed the mag. Azine profiles and accounts from people who knew her, read in sequence from 1996 to 1999, and what you see across 3 years is not a woman failing to manage her situation. It is a woman managing it with extraordinary competence, toward a threshold that does not exist. The adaptation had no end point. There was no amount of composure, no degree of strategic withdrawal, no level of image control that would have produced the condition she needed. The story was not going to arrive at a point of satisfaction. It would continue to require her for as long as she was available to be required. The demand was not finite. He could not give her what she needed. He had never had it. The apparatus was the condition of his existence, the way weather is the condition of a life. Not chosen, not removable, adapted to over such a long period that the adaptation had become indistinguishable from the person. He could not hand her what had taken him a lifetime to absorb. He could not describe what he had learned because he could not see what he had learned. You cannot give someone immunity to a disease you have carried so long it stopped making you sick. The moment she understood this, the moment the unavailability of what she needed became fully clear, cannot be placed on a single day. But people who were close to her suggest it was visible by 1998. The shift from negotiating for something to negotiating against losing what remained. The recognition that the tables were not going to produce what she needed, because what she needed could not be put on any of them. What she did with that recognition? She did not leave. She shifted what she was negotiating for. She stopped trying to expand the private space and began trying to hold what was left of it. This shift cost her the belief in expansion. She was no longer building. She was defending. She was not negotiating for money. She was not negotiating for the house on Northmore Street. She was not negotiating for a better settlement the image terms. She was negotiating for the right to exist in her own life on her own terms, to be the author of her own days, to have a face that belonged to her, to be a woman and not a character. That was never on any table. Could not be. The tables were not built to hold it. Return to the table from the cold open. Now you know what both sides brought. July 16, 1999. Essex County Airport, Fairfield, New Jersey. The departure time was later than planned, after 8 p.m., with full darkness descending over the water. The aircraft was a single-engine Piper Saratoga. John Kennedy Jr. was at the controls. Carolyn was in the passenger seat. Her sister, Carolyn Bessette, 34 years old, was seated behind them. They were flying to Hyannisport for the wedding of John's cousin, Rory Kennedy, scheduled the following day. The flight was approximately an hour. The stakes, as anyone who has ever boarded a small aircraft understands them, are the stakes of any ordinary journey. That you depart, and the gap between departure and arrival is uneventful, and you arrive. What she brought to this last table, what remained? 3 years of negotiating inside a life that had been harder than she had understood when she sat down at the first table. The composure she had built, real, exhausting, hard-won, genuinely hers even though it had cost her the version of herself that had not needed to build it. The love that had survived what the structure had asked of it. The open question of what the life would become. The defended interior. The small private Carolyn that had been maintained through every previous negotiation at increasing cost. She brought what she had left. It was not nothing. It was real. What the last table asked of her. To trust. To sit in the passenger seat. To believe in the arrival. The National Transportation Safety Board concluded that the probable cause of the crash was spatial disorientation in haze conditions. John Kennedy Jr., 38 years old, W. As not instrument rated. He was flying at night over water in conditions low visibility, no horizon visible, that required instruments he was not certified to use. The aircraft entered a graveyard spiral at approximately 9:40 p.m. Radar contact was lost. The debris field was located the following morning, 7.5 miles southwest of Martha's Vineyard. All three were found. Now read the cold open again with everything you know. North Moore Street, 1996. She is 30 years old. She is standing outside the apartment where she lives with the most famous man in America, and there are cameras across the street, and she has brought to this life everything she came with. Her self-knowledge, her intelligence, her earned career, the precise and irreducible fact of who she was. And he is standing beside her, and he has brought, without choosing it, without intending it, without fully understanding what he was carrying or what it would cost the person standing next to him. The name, the story, the machine, the 30-year American mythology that was not finished with the Kennedy family and was not going to be finished. She was negotiating for the ordinary future. Hyannisport, her sister's hand in the dark of the cabin. Another year. The open question answered. The life, finally, on terms that left room to breathe. The negotiation was already decided before she sat down in that aircraft. She did not know that. The final terms were settled over the Atlantic, somewhere between the coast of New Jersey and the coast of Massachusetts. There was no settlement meeting. There was no document. There were simply the terms, final, permanent, without appeal, of a negotiation that had begun on a sidewalk in Tribeca 3 years earlier. She accepted the terms. There was nothing left to negotiate. The final terms gave her 32 years of a specific, irreducible life. Not a symbol's life, person's life. A childhood in Greenwich that belonged entirely to her. Career constructed with her own intelligence and her own labor in one of the most competitive and demanding environments in New York. Close friendships. People who knew her before the character existed and remember her with the specificity of people who knew an actual person. The wedding photographs from Cumberland Island, which are luminous and private and remain, even now, the most accurate record of who she was at that moment. Fully present, fully herself, not performing for anyone. The style, genuinely hers, assembled from real convictions and a real eye, influential in ways that are still visible in how women dress and how fashion talks about women dressing. 3 years of a marriage that was real, complicated and real. Two people who loved each other inside a structure that made loving each other harder than it should have been, but who were trying. The evidence suggests they were trying. The final terms took everything that came after. The future she had not yet reached. The resolution to the open question, whether the terms could shift, whether the life could become more workable, whether she and her husband could find their way to something that left enough of both of them intact. The self she was still in the process of becoming at 32. The mornings that were just mornings. The walk to the coffee shop with no one watching. What the final terms reveal about the first table, reading backward from the end to the beginning, is the shape of the table itself. One side held something that could be given away incrementally, negotiation by negotiation, small daily cost by small daily cost. Her privacy, her effortlessness, her certainty of herself, her belief in the expansion of the possible. Things that are real and that compound when they are taken, but that can be taken so gradually that the taking feels manageable each time it happens. The other side held something that could not be reduced at all. The name, the story, the machine, the 30-year memento. Of an American mythology. One side could give. The other side could not. The direction of a table like that is set from the beginning. You do not need to see the end to know where it is going. But you only see the shape of it clearly from the end. I have read the accounts of people who knew Carolyn Bessette Kennedy across those 3 years. The profiles, the reports, the recollections of friends and colleagues. And what they describe is not a woman who was defeated by the life. They describe a woman who was managing something that could not be fully managed, with tools that were real and skills that were genuine, toward an outcome that was not available to her. She was not inadequate to the task. The task was not available to be completed. A table built like that has one direction. The person on the side that can give things away will give them away, one negotiation at a time, until there is nothing left to give. This is not a verdict on love. It is not a verdict on the marriage. It is the geometry of the situation. The final terms were settled. This is what they said. She should have been able to put on the table the most basic human thing in the world, the right to be a private person in an extraordinary life, to have a face that was hers and mornings that were hers and a future that she was building rather than defending. That should have been worth everything. It should have been the one non-negotiable term. She put everything else on the table instead. Old money tragedy. Subscribe.